There's a particular kind of silence that settles over people who've spoken too many times without being heard. It's not shyness, and it's not peace. It's the quiet that comes after someone has tried, failed, and finally stopped trying. Psychology refers to this as emotional withdrawal, and it's far more common than most people realize. The question worth exploring is this: what happens inside a person to make silence feel safer than speaking? When we talk about people becoming quiet after pain, we're describing a specific behavioral shift. This isn't about someone having a bad day and needing space. It's about a gradual, often permanent change in how someone interacts with the world around them. Research in behavioral psychology suggests that this kind of withdrawal typically follows a pattern of repeated emotional injuries rather than a single traumatic event. The person who becomes quiet in this way often started out quite different. They may have been open, expressive, willing to share their thoughts and feelings. But over time, something fundamental shifted. They learned through experience that expressing their pain didn't lead to relief or understanding. Instead, it led to dismissal, judgment, or worse, their vulnerability being used against them later. It's important to distinguish this from introversion. Introverts recharge through solitude and may prefer quieter environments, but they don't necessarily fear expression. The silence that follows accumulated pain is different. It's protective. It's calculated. It comes from a place of experience rather than temperament. Human behavior studies indicate that people have different thresholds for emotional pain, much like they do for physical pain. Some individuals can endure repeated disappointments and continue reaching out. Others, after a certain point, make an unconscious decision that the risk of further hurt outweighs the potential benefit of connection. This decision doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of countless small moments where speaking up didn't serve them. To understand why people choose silence, we need to look at what happens psychologically when pain accumulates without resolution. First, there's the concept of emotional exhaustion. Every time a person opens up about something difficult, they're expending emotional energy. They're making themselves vulnerable, which requires courage and effort. When that vulnerability is met with understanding and support, the energy feels well spent. But when it's met with indifference, mockery, or betrayal, the person experiences what psychologists call an emotional deficit. Over time, these deficits add up. The individual starts to feel depleted. They realize they're pouring energy into a process that doesn't replenish them. It's similar to working a job where you're never paid. Eventually, you stop showing up. The same principle applies to emotional expression. When the return on investment consistently fails to materialize, withdrawal becomes the logical response. Another factor is the loss of faith in communication itself. Many people who become quiet after pain once believed deeply in the power of talking things through. They thought that if they could just explain how they felt, others would understand and things would improve. Research on interpersonal communication shows that this belief is actually quite common and healthy in functional relationships. But in dysfunctional dynamics, repeated attempts to communicate needs or boundaries are ignored or punished. What happens then is fascinating from a psychological standpoint. The person begins to internalize a new belief: words don't work. This isn't a conscious thought they articulate to themselves. It's a deeper shift in how they perceive the world. They've gathered evidence, through lived experience, that expressing pain doesn't reduce it. In some cases, it actually increases it by opening them up to further criticism or abandonment. This connects to research on learned helplessness, a concept originally studied in behavioral psychology. When individuals repeatedly experience situations where their actions have no effect on outcomes, they eventually stop trying to change those outcomes. In social contexts, this can manifest as silence. The person hasn't lost the ability to speak. They've lost the belief that speaking will matter. The third mechanism is self-protection through strategic withdrawal. Silence, in this context, becomes a form of emotional armor. By not sharing, the person avoids giving others information that could be used to hurt them. They avoid the disappointment that comes when support doesn't arrive. They avoid the exhaustion of explaining themselves to people who've proven they don't truly want to understand. Psychology suggests this is an adaptive response, not a pathological one. In environments where expression is genuinely unsafe or unproductive, withdrawing makes sense. The challenge comes when this protective silence extends beyond the harmful situation into healthier contexts. But that's a natural consequence of learned behavior. So, what actually drives someone to this point? Behavioral analysis points to several recurring patterns. One of the most common is chronic invalidation. This happens when a person's feelings, experiences, or perceptions are consistently dismissed or minimized by others. Consider a workplace scenario. An employee repeatedly raises concerns about an unfair workload distribution or a problematic process. Each time, management responds with variations of, "That's just how it is," or "Everyone deals with this." Over months or years, that employee learns that their input isn't valued. They stop bringing up concerns. They stop offering solutions. They show up, do the minimum required, and save their thoughts for outside that environment. To outsiders, they might seem disengaged or unmotivated. But what's really happened is a rational adjustment to a system that doesn't reward their engagement. The same pattern appears in personal relationships. Someone might repeatedly express feeling neglected or undervalued, only to be told they're too sensitive or demanding. After enough of these interactions, they stop expressing those needs. They go quiet. The relationship continues, but something essential has died in it. The quiet person hasn't stopped having needs. They've stopped believing those needs will be met through communication. Family dynamics often create these patterns as well. A person growing up in an environment where their struggles were ignored or mocked learns early that vulnerability is dangerous. They might become the child who stops asking for help, who handles everything alone, who never shares what's really going on. This often gets praised as independence or maturity, but underneath it's often protective silence formed by unacknowledged pain. Another significant trigger is betrayal of trust, particularly when confidants become sources of harm. Research on trust and relationships shows that it takes very few instances of betrayal to fundamentally alter someone's willingness to be vulnerable. When a person shares something painful or private, and that information is later weaponized against them, dismissed, or spread to others, the impact is profound. They learn that even designated safe people aren't actually safe. This is especially damaging because it attacks the foundation of human connection. We're social creatures who need some level of emotional intimacy to thrive. When the risk of intimacy starts to feel greater than its rewards, people retreat inward. They become the friend who never quite shares what's really wrong, the partner who keeps their deepest thoughts private, the colleague who's friendly but never personal. There's also the pattern of chronic unreciprocated effort. This is commonly observed in relationships where one person consistently does the emotional labor while the other remains passive or takes without giving. The giver eventually experiences what researchers call compassion fatigue. They've spent so much energy caring for others who don't reciprocate that they have nothing left to give. Their silence often comes from pure exhaustion. They're not choosing to be distant. They're running on empty. When someone undergoes this transformation, certain behavioral changes become apparent to careful observers. The most obvious is a shift in communication patterns. Where once this person might have shared detailed accounts of their day, their feelings, or their struggles, they now offer brief, surface-level responses. "I'm fine" becomes their default answer to "How are you?" Not because they are fine, but because explaining how they're not fine has proven pointless or harmful. Their conversations stay light. They'll discuss weather, news, shared tasks, but anything requiring emotional depth gets redirected or shut down. This isn't deception. It's boundary setting. They've learned to keep their inner world private because exposing it hasn't served them well. Social recalibration is another common change. Psychology research on social networks shows that people naturally adjust their circles based on reciprocity and satisfaction. Someone who's become quiet after pain often dramatically reduces their social engagement. They maintain fewer relationships, but those they keep tend to be with people who've proven trustworthy. They become highly selective about who gets access to them. This can look like isolation to outsiders, but it's often more accurately described as curation. They're not avoiding all people. They're avoiding people in situations that have historically caused them harm. They might turn down social invitations, stop initiating contact, or keep conversations brief. This is often misinterpreted as depression or antisocial behavior, but it's frequently neither. It's a conscious or unconscious decision to protect their limited emotional resources. Many people in this state also shift to internal processing methods. Instead of talking through their problems, they might journal, create art, exercise, or simply think things through alone. Research on coping mechanisms shows these can be healthy outlets, though they work best when balanced with some level of social connection. The person who's gone quiet has often become skilled at self-soothing and self-analysis because external support proved unreliable. This kind of silence creates a complex set of outcomes. On one hand, there are genuine benefits that develop. People who've learned to be quiet about their pain often develop remarkable emotional independence. They become skilled at managing their own feelings, solving their own problems, and finding internal sources of strength. They're not waiting for rescue because they've learned rescue rarely comes. They also typically develop stronger, clearer boundaries. Having been hurt by overexposure, they become more discerning about what they share and with whom. This can actually lead to healthier relationships over time, though it makes forming new relationships more challenging. They know their limits and enforce them, which is a valuable life skill many people never develop. There's a certain resilience that comes with this territory as well. When you've learned to carry your pain quietly and still function, you develop an inner toughness that serves you in difficult times. You're not dependent on external validation or support to keep going. However, these adaptive benefits come with potential costs. The most obvious is the risk of genuine isolation. There's a difference between healthy solitude and loneliness. When protective silence cuts someone off from all meaningful connection, it can lead to a different kind of suffering. Humans need community, even if they've been hurt by it. There's also the challenge of reconnecting when circumstances change or when the person is ready. Someone who's spent years being quiet about their pain has practiced that silence so much it becomes reflexive. Even when they encounter safe people or situations where opening up would be beneficial, they might struggle to do so. The protective walls that once served them well can become a prison. Other people often misinterpret this silence as coldness, arrogance, or disinterest. This can create a self-fulfilling prophecy where the quiet person is further isolated, not because they want to be, but because others find them unapproachable. They're not trying to be distant, they're trying to be safe, but the distinction isn't always visible from the outside. There's an interesting paradox here that behavioral researchers have noted. The silence that follows pain can coexist with tremendous inner strength. These aren't broken people. They're often highly functional, capable individuals who've simply learned to keep their struggles private. They might be the coworker who never complains but always delivers, the friend who listens to everyone but shares nothing, the family member who seems fine until they're suddenly not. This phenomenon tells us something important about how humans work. We're not designed to suffer alone. We're wired for connection, for being seen and understood. When the environment makes that impossible or dangerous, we adapt, but the adaptation comes at a cost. The fact that people become quiet after pain isn't a failure of character. It's evidence of how deeply we need acknowledgement and how rationally we respond when it's consistently absent. Social environments have enormous power to shape whether people feel safe expressing themselves. In families, workplaces, friendships, and communities where pain is met with compassion and where vulnerability is protected, people remain open. Where it's met with judgment, dismissal, or exploitation, people close off. This isn't mysterious. It's predictable. Understanding this matters because many of us encounter quiet people and make assumptions. We think they're cold or boring or have nothing to say. But often, they have plenty to say. They've just learned that saying it doesn't help. Recognizing this can change how we interact with others and how we create spaces where people feel safe enough to be honest about their struggles. Silence after pain is both a shield and a loss. It protects, but it also isolates. It's a rational response to irrational circumstances, a way of surviving environments that don't nurture emotional honesty. The people who've gone quiet aren't weak. They're often the ones who've been strong for too long without support, who've tried to bridge gaps that others refuse to meet them on, who've learned the hard way that not all pain deserves to be shared with everyone. If there's one insight worth carrying forward, it's this: silence often speaks louder than words. When someone who used to be expressive goes quiet, it's worth asking why. Not intrusively, but with genuine care. And more importantly, it's worth creating the kind of relationships and environments where people don't have to choose between silence and safety. Have you noticed this pattern in your own life or in people around you? What do you think helps someone feel safe enough to speak again after they've gone quiet? Share your thoughts in the comments. These conversations matter more than we often realize. If this analysis resonated with you, consider subscribing for more explorations of human behavior and psychology. Thanks for watching.